Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. A couple of weeks ago, I put out a review for Rogue Trader, and since that time, I've had multiple people reach out asking, how was the Dogmatic run? So they're not asking about the game overall, but specifically, should I play as Dogmatic, Heretic, or Benevolentia? I have not done full runs of the other two, but since I did complete a full run as Dogmatic, I figured some of you might be interested in my thoughts overall, so you can compare it with your own experiences and decide how you'd like to go through the game. Since I decided to do this video, I figured I might as well talk about the run overall. So we'll talk not only from the experience of playing as Dogmatic, but also being a noble and being an officer as well. So first and foremost, I want to say, without having finished the other two, I'm only in an Act 2 playthrough of Heretic, and I'm still in Act 1 for Benevolentia. Right now, it feels like Dogmatic is kind of the canon playthrough. I've already heard that from a role-playing standpoint, there are a lot of things that just don't mesh well or make sense when you're doing a Heretic run. And obviously, in a Warhammer type universe, trying to be the goody two-shoes hero doesn't make a whole lot of sense or doesn't really fit in well with the overall world that you're in. So Dogmatic is the one that kind of feels natural, where it's the most reactivity that makes sense, and you're not going to experience a whole lot of things that clash with what it is that you want to do. I did a romance with Cassia as Dogmatic, and I felt like that worked very, very well. While you can potentially influence Cassia to be more chaotic, it does still feel really good to have her as Dogmatic. It seems like both of you are working towards building up separate empires that are going to serve the Emperor. And even though I'm not a big fan of Cassia's romance, because it's kind of too lovey-dovey for me, it kind of reminds me of Sosale in Wrath of the Righteous, which I also wasn't a huge fan of, but there's a ton of content for it, so I still had a great time, and playing as a Dogmatic character, there were just no issues there, so definitely enjoyed it. It was absolutely fantastic matching Dogmatic and Noble together. I think the game really lends well to playing as Noble from a role-playing standpoint. You're essentially already royalty anyway, and a lot of the interactions that you'll have with people, even if you don't get unique dialogue for having the Noble background, it just feels like a Noble talking to his underlings, or Noble talking to someone who's on an equal level with him. And so a lot of the conversations just feel right. The only caveat that I would add to this is, if I was going to do a Noble playthrough, I'd probably run it as Benevolentia so that it feels easier to keep Abelard. It's not bad having Abelard in a Dogmatic party. He doesn't really clash since he's ride or die with you no matter what you choose. But it's just obvious he's not pure Dogmatic the way you are. And so I put him on the bench. But when you play throughout the game, there are a ton of interactions where you can basically decide the person that you're speaking with is beneath you, and instead introduce yourself through Abelard, or have Abelard say something for you. And that just works really, really well when you have that Noble background. It fits in like a glove. And so I think a Benevolentia run where you keep Abelard in the party at all times and run as a Noble, that meshes like butter. I feel like that would have worked really, really well. In my run, he only made it through, I think, maybe the middle of Act 3, and so I didn't get to experience all of that content. Now, for that run, I play it as an officer, and I think it goes fantastic with Noble. Just really fits into the idea of, it's beneath me to get my hands dirty. Everybody else should be doing things for me. Fits that like a glove. And the cool thing about Officer is, in every other game that I've played, if you're the type of character who focuses on just buffing and healing other party members, it's boring. It's boring. You want a party member handling that stuff, and usually you want to be the big time damage dealing character. That is not the case in Warhammer at all. Playing as an officer who is wholly focused on buffing party members and giving them extra attacks feels great. It just feels absolutely fantastic. I rarely even bothered to attack. Most of the time, I was just trying to help my party members attack, and I had a ball. I had an absolute ball doing this, and it works great probably no matter what conviction you use. But in Dogmatic, it was fantastic. It fit right in with being a noble commissaire type of character. So definitely no complaints there. And honestly, I would say overall, I released multiple builds prior to my Dogmatic run on Daring, and just about all of them worked out really well. There was synergy that I didn't even realize when I was putting it together, that fleshed out later on during the game, and I was just happy with how all of it worked out. Rogue Trader is definitely an easier game than Wrath of the Righteous anyway, so if you're concerned about, understanding the mechanics or being good enough to get through it, you could pick just about any build and be able to get through some of the lower level difficulties regardless. If you're playing on unfair, obviously you're going to have to make some adjustments and min max a little bit more, but just in general, I felt like all the builds that I had put out on the channel worked like a charm, and I had no complaints in that area. The last thing I'll mention that I really enjoyed about the Dogmatic run was the ending, even though my ending was buggy, because there were some things that I just flat out wasn't able to do because of bugs. And I think there are one or two things that the game didn't recognize properly. And so I ended up getting the wrong ending for it. But the ending is very robust. As I mentioned in the review, it takes into account a lot of the decisions that you have made. And so I really appreciate it. It felt like an appropriately epic ending based on all that I had done. So I was relatively satisfied by the end. Of course, I'll be more satisfied when I'm able to do another run that takes all of the patches and bug fixes into account, and hopefully I'll get an even stronger ending. There was a few things that I disliked about Dogmatic. By now, I'm sure most people know, based on the conviction and decisions that you make throughout the game, it is possible to unlock a secret party member. I was very disappointed by the Dogmatic party member I was able to unlock. I felt like from a build standpoint and even straight up from a content standpoint, it was just a big nothing burger. And I didn't realize that was how it was going to be. So it was definitely a blow and something where I was like, why did they even bother to do this? So I'm hoping that later down the line, there will be some content updates that flesh that out and make it feel more epic than it does right now. And I was also disappointed with the way that your Space Marine Ulfar works out. I think his build is inferior compared to Argenta, and I don't think he's a really big leap forward offensively compared to some of the other party members that you have. And that's just very disappointing, in my opinion. I think there should just be no question whatsoever that from an offensive standpoint, he is an absolute beast and someone who's head and shoulders above the rest of your group. I also honestly think it should be harder to get him and to keep him on the party. I thought that doing a Dogmatic run would create more camaraderie between us and make it easier for him to say, okay, you know what? This is a team that I want to be with. But that's really not the case. Regardless of your conviction, you can go ahead and pick him up. There might be some things that you do that cause him to decide to leave the party, but being Dogmatic doesn't really impact his willingness to stay or want to join in the first place. I think maybe there's one Dogmatic check you can do that let you skip one hurdle to getting him, but it's not a big a deal at all. At the end of the day, it's just a conversation. So I was a little disappointed in that. And frankly, I'm disappointed in how the world reacts to him. To me, if I'm walking around with a Space Marine, this should be a big, huge deal. And just about everybody we come in contact with should be making note of that. And it should allow me to do things that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. But I didn't feel like that was the case. I didn't feel like there are people who submitted to me or people who let me do things simply because Ulfar was in my party. And to me, that doesn't feed into what Space Marines are supposed to be like in the lore. So I was a little disappointed with that interpretation. Take all of this with a grain of salt, because the final quest for Ulfar was bugged for me. So I haven't seen his true ending, and I haven't seen all of the reactivity that there is in the game for him. So it could be that if I had finished all of that content, or rather, if that content wasn't bugged, then I would have a different perspective. And I'll definitely circle back to this when I finish the Benevolentia run, which will most likely have Ulfar on the party and to some degree. So maybe I'll feel differently then, but definitely right now, after finishing that Dogmatic run, I'm not crazy impressed with his character. And then the final thing that I would mention that I disliked about the Dogmatic run is that it didn't feel like I generated true camaraderie with the other Dogmatic party members, specifically Heinrichs and Argenta. It never felt like we were friends. It never felt like we were truly loyal to each other. It never felt, to some degree, it didn't feel like we had developed a real relationship, right? It definitely felt like boss, employee, I keep you at a distance type of situation. And for me personally, that was disappointing. My understanding is that with Heinrichs, your relationship with him changes significantly if you romance him, which is what I'm doing in my Heretic run. So I'll definitely talk about that when I finish the Heretic run, whether or not I feel differently about Heinrichs. But definitely for Argenta, I feel like this is very, very consistent that to some degree she is cold. Honestly, I don't think she gets enough content to flesh out all of her personality and really develop her character. And so it just feeds into you don't have a real connection with her. And I felt as a pure dogmatic character, there should be something more. We should have a tighter bond. I'm not even talking about a romance, just a tighter bond as far as we recognize that we are both stalwart servants of the Emperor, and there's nothing that we wouldn't put on the line in service to the Imperium. I didn't feel like we generated that real understanding between us. And that was disappointing because I thought that we would. And that's it. That's my overall thoughts on doing a dogmatic, noble run in Rogue Trader. Hopefully, this gives you all some ideas about what are some of the positives and negatives regarding going through the game in that manner. As always, leave me your comments down below with any feedback you have, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.